So we're live now. Hello,
Yeah.
composers.
Hi.
So
Yeah.
today we're speaking about academic music, something
Yeah.
tempting academic music.
And just, yeah, what that actually means. I think also in contrast to our last post where we criticized music for being um, too um, maybe lacking in character um, and personality and appeasing to these conservative prizes. But there's another extreme where compete music, which is trying to be um, too lofty and sound too, and its main concern is to sound very smart and intelligent. And sometimes that music isn't necessarily enjoyable to listen to, and it's appealing to the academia and the academic crowd. So there's kind of these two extremes that I think we all. I mean, we at least for me, I know we all fall prey. I think of at least one of them, if not both. I mean, I would say probably when I was very young, like a teenage composer, I probably uh, fall prey to trying to appease to the more the prize and the conservatives. And certainly as a young student, I mean, even maybe occasionally as an older graduate student, I I was in a uh, very competitive, well-respected composition programs with very talented, high-level composers, and I was very aware of that fact, and I wanted my music to sound intelligent, there was that like pressure that I was constantly facing. Um, yeah, I think I try to now in my older years. I try to fight both of those um, parallels.
Well, according Shontin, would you define academic music?
Um, Academic music is the type of music that we learn at school. Yeah. That's why it's called academic. We don't call it like a Sunday pizza night music. We call it academic music because that's the music that we learn at school. That's the music the institution promotes, advocates. It may not be as popular as other alternatives, but it is what the so-called the composition department or faculty try to teach or advocate. I would put it this way. So, for example, I'm from Hong Kong. So, in Hong Kong, academic music can mean any kind of like serial music or or uh,
Mhm.
or something that's really noise based or even including the very creative music written by Megan. So, but of course, if you write like popular music, then people will say, "Oh, you don't write academic music." Or if you suddenly go back to 19th century or 18th century, then people will say, "Oh, you don't write academic music." Or your music is not academic. Yeah, so I believe I believe there is no like one single answer to this question. I believe it depends on like a context. I I I think Megan's music is not really academic if we
Mhm.
talk about the music in the new music in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I for me too, I also felt like academic music that is very serious in tone. Like it's not ever lighthearted or goofy or funny. Um, and I definitely tried to make my music super serious. And if anything, went like dark while I was a student. And it's definitely been harder for me to write music that's light-hearted, because I think in my head I'm like, oh no, it's not academic. No one's going to take this seriously. Everyone's going to be like, oh, she's not a real whatever that is, or whatever.
A real composer.
Yeah, a real composer,
Yeah, I will add that it seems like there's some morality involved in all of this. Like, academic may be good in some context, or it may be viewed as bad, as a detriment.
I also wonder, because we're all three of us are a similar generation, if there's like generational context to it, because if you look at music from like the 70s and 80s, like it's much more common to find pieces that are very humorous that were presented within the academia than it was it is now. I think it's maybe a little bit easier to find pieces that are lighthearted than it was maybe 10 years ago. But still not that common. Not nearly what it was, at least from the repertoire that is available for us, that's still being performed and we can still read about from the 70s.
It seems like from that point of view, it will seem like most composers don't like to laugh, or they don't like to have a good time, or stuff like that. And that's the view. According to ChatGPT, in general, academic refers to anything related to education, scholarship, and formal learning, particularly
Yeah.
within institutions like universities, colleges, or research organizations. It encompasses disciplines of study, scholarly research, and the pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it mentions,
I think just to break that stigma for anyone who is not a composer, listening to this podcast, anyone who has been to any composer who has been to any kind of contemporary music festival could concur that composers in general do actually like to have fun and have a good time.
yes, I would say so too, because in most of these festivals, a lot of drinking, for example, takes place, and a lot of,
Drinking, hanging out, laughing, like
yeah,
good times, like they're
uh,
made for the young, but good times.
but sometimes the same people don't have that general, like you were saying, for yourself, they don't apply the same attitude to the way they write music as to the way they live life, or the way they look
Yeah.
at life. And here is something interesting, because it says about academic music generally refers to music that is studied, taught, and created within formal educational institutions like universities,
Yeah. Well,
conservatories.
I was talking about a group with Juan right before this that I had a hard time with, and they were definitely willing to be humorous in their performances, but they were so interested. They were, I would say, not academic, and that they were novel. And I mean, maybe there's an example of why it's difficult to be humorous and still be respected within like academia and also in intelligent groups, because there are groups that are presenting work and trying to be humorous and do it in a completely novel way. So they're doing things that are gimmicky or just weird or for attention, that have no kind of artistic purpose, or they don't they don't have like a form or a sculpture or a any kind of meaning or anything into their piece. It's just like, let's see what weird sounds and weird things we can do and just do them. So I mean, and maybe that's part of the fear, is that there are, I don't think they're actually quite a good examples, but there's not from our contemporaries. I think most of the good examples are from like the 70s and 80s of pieces that are humorous or lighthearted in nature, but still have a lot of artistic integrity.
To what
So that
composers are you thinking about?
I mean, I think that, like, for whatever reason, the first piece that comes to mind is like the Ligeti metronome piece.
Okay, yeah.
It's, I mean, so I could see how, so I don't think it's necessarily gimmicky, but I could see how someone could say it is gimmicky. It is definitely very novel. It's very different. But if you actually listen to it, it does have a lot of interesting things happening with it. It has a clear form going from like dense to really sparse. It goes from like a sound cloud to eventually it's breaking down into these rhythmic patterns. To like at the end, there's kind of this like tension between just a couple different metronomes, and you're kind of trying to bank on who's gonna let. So it is. There is actually musicality naturally built out. I mean, and it's a very conceptual piece. What is that piece called?
It's called Poème Symphonique. I can put it
Poème Symphonique.
on
So
screen.
the idea is he I think it's 100 metronomes, and they're wooden.
Yes.
The wooden old-fashioned metronomes. They're all hand wound up and released at the same time. And because they're, mechanisms, they're not, perfect things, that they all they all last certain amounts of time, and that as they get low on the crank, they slow down and lose speed. It still has, to me, artistic integrity, even though I could see it being humorous or funny, or it's definitely not necessarily deep.
Bad. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, that's the piece right there. It's like the piece, and the thing is that it goes along with his general aesthetic. Like I have mentioned on various occasions that I like that mechanical. Like very interesting in what was mechanical on the automaton of the part of the human being, and I think that this piece expresses it pretty well. Let's listen. And it goes and goes until only a few are left, right? I remember.
Yeah.
It was like the machine dying out. The batteries get drained or something, you might say. I think that
I like Chicago has a lot of great pieces that are very humorous. In nature. And from what I'm not old enough to know firsthand, but from what I know from people of the boomer generation telling me, is that it used to be very typical that in the academia there would be one piece on every concert that was more the lighthearted piece. And I think for our generation, that went away as being something, I don't know. I don't think I can't think of any. I can think of I can't think of any funny pieces that were good in any. So I went to Northwestern and then obviously University of Buffalo. Northwestern did have a couple of really bad funny pieces.
Bad funny pieces. I like that term.
Yeah. Like all those Michael Daugherty. Do you know of him?
But then
like
you are
he like dresses up in costume and like it's just very gimmicky. It's very bad. They did perform some of that. But I can see like people think it's funny because like they have a bassoon player dressing up as Elvis. But then the piece is actually kind of bad and cliche and conservative and just not interesting at all. The most interesting part is the costumes. But yeah, I don't remember Buffalo ever programming anything that was lighthearted in nature ever.
I don't think that any of our colleagues went for it, right? Or even
Ethan maybe a
the
little bit.
composers
Ethan
that
had a little bit of that in him, I think.
or even the
Ethan,
composers that went for joining Buffalo. I don't think that I ever heard anything. And we are
no,
composing
I think
like
he was the most because I remember that Ethan Hayden he had like a piece that he had like different styles of playing and it was like he had like drum set like a la Animal from the Muppets and there was some like a little bit of lightheartedness in his music. And I think we were all so scared to do anything like that. I mean, at least that's the impression I got, and I know I felt that way. Yeah, I felt that way for sure, and yeah, I think that was maybe not the vibe of June in Buffalo.
but I
I mean,
think
the first piece I wrote
oh,
after graduation is a piece I titled "Unacademic," because it was me trying to take on some of these maybe feelings I thought in the academia and try to not go with them. Like the piece is a little bit funny. Yeah. And it actually goes I think it's like to me like a parallel piece to when I was writing Liaison, my dancer piece. I was like really, really careful when I had this contraption to make it not read like a marionette. Because if it read like a marionette, it would be very like funny. And then the whole thing would seem gimmicky. And like I already had a dancer tied to a piano. So it was like really, really try to not do marionette, any kind of imagery, any kind of anything that would read that way. And then this piece, the pianist, it's a piece for soprano, piano, and guitar. And the pianist is doing some bows inside the piano. And there's like a couple times that like she's holding the bow and that like the singer literally uses the pianist as a marionette. So it's like I literally I had spent most of my academic career working on a piece where I really tried not to do this marionette model, and I'm like, oh, let's do marionette now. So I mean, yeah, and I think I a lot of my other music, like I think, I don't think my music has been super melodic, but like the idea of like little melodies, like in maybe my own very abstracted ways, have come into some of my music, which wasn't something I would have done in academia. The idea of I think I embraced was more easy to embrace very simple forms, lots of repetition. Yeah.
I will say that as you get older, you care less about being not politically correct, let's say academically correct. In a way, it's like you get farther and farther away, and that it is a concern of the last century or so. Probably with the concert hall, it came around. I would say that with the around the time of Wagner, probably around the same
Yeah.
time that people, the audiences weren't allowed to give an applause whenever they like, that the etiquette for the concert hall became very strict driven, and it kind of intensified throughout the 20th century. Yeah, but
Oh yeah, there's a very elitist kind of mentality, especially in the mainstream classical world, for sure.
yeah, I would say so. And when it came down, like when the music composition PhDs came around, I think that it got a bit worse. Even if you had like Mauricio Kagel doing his thing and Ligeti doing his thing, and even if you mention somebody like Lahenman, it seemed like he was having a good time, but he was exploring all of the sound worlds and stuff like that. And what I
Yeah,
like about him is like he's not that much of a strict or let's say serious guy. He's kind of a silly guy. Uh,
yeah. I mean, but I, in that respect, though, I do feel like most of us would classify people who are um in the Lackaman, not Lackaman himself, but like students of his, or in people or students in the Lackaman camp as academic composers, which is interesting.
yeah, yeah, sure. But now thinking about it, just look at how most composers dress. There's a dress code for composers. Like they
Mhm.
have they dress in a very serious way, except let's say
So
somebody
me.
like Steve Reich
I
that
mean, minus today, I'm wearing a black shirt, but half the time I'm wearing like. I remember David Felder used to comment. I don't remember it that extreme, but I don't always dress seriously. I'll wear like bright orange or bright yellow or some wacky colors. And David Felder used to like comment about it, like in just like a way because I stood out as not, um, you know, being dressing serious sometimes.
well,
Not in a bad way. He wasn't making fun of me.
I don't
He wasn't
remember.
making fun of me or talking about me in any kind of derogatory way whatsoever. It was just that he'd be like, "Oh, you have that's orange," and I'd be wearing like a bright fluorescent like orange dress or something. I don't know, but
I see
in
what
a
you mean.
way that it didn't fit in from the crowd. It stood out
But how
from the computer crowd.
there seems to be a uniform of how composers dress, dress code that gets pretty old pretty fast. Like they have this code, and then they have underneath it a long sleeve shirt, and they will have these trousers and stuff, and it will be like a codified way of dressing, whereas you don't get that in the visual arts, you don't get that in theater. In fact, you get more creative, more colorful stuff. I
Yeah,
think
I
that
would
the
say.
figure of the composer itself,
I would say that I don't see that quite as I know what you mean exactly, but I don't see that quite as much in especially in the last 10 years. I feel like in the last 10 years there is it's still a problem in contemporary music for sure, the lack of diversity, but it's a lot better than it was a decade ago. Like you do see a lot more um female composers, a lot more composer, like transgendered composers, a lot more um, African American composers and Latina all sorts of different composers, and I think the variety has made it maybe a little bit more interesting. There's more cultures. I think growing up, most of the people I knew that like I had met at like summer camps that studied composition that were like around my age all came from like white upper class families near urban areas. And I mean, I lived in the Chicago suburbs, so I didn't live. I lived in. I didn't live in. I lived near a lot of artistic opportunities, but like my family was very, very middle class. It was just very average work. But because I was in the like in classical music and and working as a composer and around those type of people, I felt like, wow, I must be poor, like because I wasn't super wealthy, but I was nowhere near poor either. It was just that there was only this was rich. I was rarely around other females. It was just rich white males. And now it's so much more diversified than it was. It's still not representative, I think, of society. Like it's still probably more white male prevalent than society is, but like it's a significant improvement over the last decade, at least from what I've seen in the concerts I've been to and the social circles I've been to, and just
I think that kind of like I was gonna say that composers kind of like have done this on themselves, even when the players of an orchestra have changed from wearing a tuxedo towards wearing all black. I think that still the tone is kind of like pretty grim and pretty not
yeah.
dark but serious in tone. Like this is a very spiritual art. This is not an art of the earth, and what it has done in the
For
end
sure.
is to alienate audiences. It's a harm that's been self done.
Oh yeah. I mean, I try to tear down that wall. Like I always am trying to just kind of come back down to reality and like the elitist attitude is really a problem. And I do think like the one that when we talked about academic music, about the possibility of doing this podcast, one of the first names that came to mind was Boulez. And I wonder, like, is he a contribution to this academic mindset? Because, like, a lot of his music ideas, especially when we looking at like the indeterminate, not indeterminate, the like the total serialism, integral serialism.
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff. He, that comes totally out of post World War II mentality, where World War II was very brutal and it showcased the ugliness of mankind in so many different ways. There was so many things across, the globe that really were showcased awful humanity. And so many artists struggled with that post World War II and how we, pre World War II music was pretty romantic, and always about making beauty. And how do we as people who created brutality and ugliness. How do we now create beauty? And so, you know, a lot of these composers had different ideas on how to do that, and it mostly tried to involve processes in making their music less human. And when you make it less human, oftentimes you make it more mathematical, which, you know, math is very academic. So that ties his music into,
But Boulez was
you know, and it also makes the music very serious and stoic. Yeah.
Boulez was really extreme. He was an extremist, I will say. Like he had a very clear idea of what were the lines that the music should develop towards to, and he didn't accept music that
It was
didn't
his generation,
comply with
though.
that. You
And from what
say that it,
I've read music history, I think that was his generation. I think most composers of his generation
well, you can
were
say
had
that
that attitude.
with people like also Charles
Like, how old
Warren.
would he be if he was still alive? 100 and something.
Huh?
Okay, so if Boulez were still alive, he passed away in 2016. Boulez would be 100, almost exactly 100. Actually, yeah.
I think
Yesterday he would have turned 100.
yesterday. Okay,
Yeah. So it is a centennial.
pretty interesting
This
that.
is interesting. I haven't seen a big. Maybe it's just the area in Chicago. I have not seen a Boulez, which is crazy because he actually conducted and was in Chicago quite a lot. I have not seen a big centennial celebration for him, or I just missed it. I haven't seen the advertisements.
You're right. You are
Yeah.
right. That's something to consider. Like how that
Yeah.
attitude have faded away in many ways.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's like, is academic music a problem or no? In many ways, you can say that it is. Like many artists go to academia to end creativity in many ways. Like their creativity is stifled within an academic setting, and it shouldn't be that way. And the connotations of being academic is like you should do things a certain way. It's kind of like in exact opposition to what the artist freedom should concede him in many ways. And
Yeah.
now you're seeing that. I think that all of this hyper academic thinking, what has led towards is to this neo-tonal, neo-romantic way of thinking, attitude, that because that was the right way that audiences that could connect with audiences in the end, because all of this experimental, and you have two types of academicism fighting each other, and none of them seem to move the art forward. Well,
I mean, I think in the end, it's the same problem that we had with the composers that were winning these conservative prizes. Is that they wrote music with intention to appease a certain a certain sector of people, rather than trying to find a way to, you know, express themselves and develop material and make something artistically interesting and with their own personality. I think it's kind of the same. It's just that we have someone like a Pierre Boulez, or I mean, I think maybe we had talked about like someone like a Brian Ferneyhough, maybe.
Brian Ferneyhough, Milton Babbitt, Charles Warren, I would consider those composers to be.
Yeah, like, you know, and not, I'm not saying all that music is bad. I really actually, there's a few pieces of Brian Ferneyhough, some of his earlier works that I really enjoy. But the music, some of the music seems to be written with like this appeasing of this academia and seeming like really lofty and has these really, I mean, all this Parabolas as well, like having very difficult rhythms, and kind of bordering on this, like, is it possible? Is it not possible? Having all this like mathematical like integrity behind. I mean, that seems to be maybe more of a focus than like the way it sounds. Like I've studied, like, especially Boulez, is that his music is studied all the time. I feel like, and
But I don't feel that it gets played that much anymore.
it doesn't get played very much, I don't think. But I'm thinking back to like the courses I've like studied Boulez in. Nobody ever talks about how it sounds.
No, it's all
Yeah, which is no one ever talks about how it sounds.
I have a question actually.
Shantin, you're
Yeah.
back. Yes. Express.
I'm always here, but I'm listening. So my question is, when we try to say this or this is academic and what is happening there, I'm wondering. So what makes a music so-called less academic, in your opinion? How to make a music less academic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How,
I don't know. Like, I mean, for me personally, I don't know if it necessarily makes music less academia, but I just try to make music in which being respected by other composers or being played in some big festival or, you know, lofty concert program, or having my music lectured about, or lecturing, presenting my music to a predominant, composition program. Those are not, like, I guess, motivations, or necessarily, not that like I would refute any of those things, but I try my best not to write music with those goals in mind, and try to just purely write the music I want to write without fear of, it being laughed at by composers I respect. Yeah, and I would have, some of the music I've written in the last few years, I can't imagine I would have never written as a University of Buffalo student. Like I would have been just scared out of my mind. And like a lot of time, I think a lot of people thought I was a bold, adventurous composer then, but I don't know, I was taking certain types of chances. I wasn't, I definitely was very careful to make my music still seem lofty and serious and, well respected. And yeah, it's hard, and like, because obviously, like, we all want our music played and presented, and we'd like to be asked to lecture on our music or present a masterclass, or all these things. They sound like appealing things, but then if we're writing music, just for that purpose, then sometimes it can lack our own personality and artistic depth. Yeah, that's like for me, what I consider.
When I'm
Yeah,
composing,
but it is interesting because I also don't think we would consider, there's about a lot of conservative composition programs, places like Juilliard and Curtis and Yale. There's tons others, but they're, programs that are, they're well noted for composition, but they tend to have very conservative composers. Most of us wouldn't necessarily call their music, at least for me, I would never hear that music and think, oh, this is academic music. Because to me, that's like music that's appealing to win a Grammy or whatever award, that, I don't know. It is interesting.
When I am composing, I don't really think about whether my projects or pieces are academic. Actually, I don't really think about that. But I could say that the academic training plays an important role when I try to work on my materials. But but definitely I never really think about like okay, this piece must be super academic and 9 out of 10 academic, and the following piece will be 7 out of 10 kind of academic. I just don't think about that. And long time ago, a little story of mine is a student composer who who sought like advice from me, like just like briefly, not like a formal student. And then he told me that he wrote a piece that was less academic, and then I also and then he told me that because his piece try to like express something political. So I forgot how I responded to him, but I just found that piece like a normal piece of music, because actually nobody could really hear anything politics from like 6 minutes of 7 minutes of string quartet actually. So
did he considered it less academic because of the politics?
I guess he himself isn't a very sophisticated person, but at that moment he thought about that, and I believe some people they imagine that academic composers think about music in a way that we are only concerned about, let's say, the pictures, rhythms, timbers. Of course we do, but we also think about a lot more things. We also have a lot of like artistic ideas. For example, whether this piece is about like a particular story or particular like a philosophy. Well, yes, we do have these kind of things, but yes, I believe some people they have such an imagination that academic composers are people who live in their office and write very hard, and then need to double check whether a page follows the series, something like that.
I think also that I think another important point that I don't think we've mentioned is I think a lot of times this academic music is written in a way to talk about the music or to write papers about the music, that there's a lot to say about the music rather than it to be an experience to hear the music. There's certainly I think we've all been through master classes. Some of them great that people can talk about their music very, very well, in very precise ways. Sometimes interesting and sometimes not, the way they talk about the music. But then a lot of times the way they talk about the music isn't like they might be able to talk about their music, and you might be able to have a really fascinating conversation about their music, but then their music actually isn't interesting.
No, yeah.
Then that I would consider academic music if it's like written to just be talked about or written about.
Written to impress academics, written to write a paper, something like that.
Yeah,
sometimes I wish my music was more academic when I'm asked to talk about it, because I sometimes have a very difficult time talking about my music because I think like Shang Ting's talked about, intuition plays a part in his music, and intuition plays a fairly big role in my music a lot of the times too. And it's hard to that's not something you can talk about easily in an academic, sense is intuition.
Intuition. It will seem like intuition it's opposite to academic music.
Yeah.
But I would
And
say
I can't imagine in like 100 years, I can't imagine a theory class coming and taking out one of my scores. I really don't think that's in the future of the world. Nor do I, am I bothered by that fact, or do I write music for that fact?
But I do think that like, of course, some people, they are very like extremely rigorous, and in that maybe for some people this is what academic means, because I like several years ago I wrote like a piano solo piece, and then because I play the piano myself, but I'm not like a super pianist, so sometimes I write in a way that is easier to play. So let's say I had a motive, and then I have to play like a double, and then the master composer asked me why the interval between the top and the lower notes changed. I said, yeah, but yes, it's the interval changes because it is easier to play, and I don't find it sound worse after making such a change. But and then then the master composer said, oh, no. You must be very rigorous about your harmony, your interval, and then you must use the same sad, same serious. I forgot the exact wording, but that's what he tried to like teach me. But maybe yes, maybe for some people this is like academic or very extremely rigorous, like very meticulous. But if being like extremely rigorous means academic, then I must not be a very academic composer. Then I'm an extremely careless person. I just, oh yeah, this is easy to play. I just put that down. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us fall into the I think for different reasons we really fall outside the academic persona.
Should I make it like a new year? Actually, it's not new year. Like the resolution for the rest of the year that I'm trying to be the most rigorous academic composer for like
Yeah, but like the same thing is like I would think
9 months.
like the main reason I would consider like your music, Shangting, not academic is I think it's too musical to be academic. Which
Thank you. I take it
like
as a compliment.
yeah, it is a compliment because it shouldn't be like musical music should be like pursued in I don't know.
But yes, I can envision the advantage of being so-called academic if we are really serious about how to climb up the academic ladder, how to survive in the academia, how to get it like performed by like by many groups at
But
the
I will say
university. Yeah.
that has more to deal with your connections than with your style.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I will say that that would probably be the most
That's
important
But
thing
should
about
we
it.
should
That's
we
my
play
biggest
like a
regret.
little snippet of like some of the other music like that we're talking about, like something like Boulez?
Huh? Sorry, I didn't catch that, Megan.
Like this more like the other music that is more academic and like a music like should we play a snippet so people can kind of hear the quality of like something like by like Pierre Boulez, something that is, music that is. I think it's music that's easy to talk about, but not necessarily
To hear, to listen,
always the
enjoyable.
most palatable.
I don't want lay people have misunderstanding that academic music shouldn't be heard. Yeah, but
Yes.
that's
No, because
I
yeah,
yeah.
I mean that there are in fact also pieces that are very interesting to talk about and very interesting to hear. From all I mean from
what happened?
contemporary pieces, I think they're,
You kind of
lots
stop, froze for
lots
a
of
bit.
music like that.
You froze for a bit.
But
Can you repeat that? Because
oh
you
me?
froze. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I just think that there are music. There is music that there is music that I think is interesting to talk about, but not interesting to hear. Um, I think that's more common than the opposite. I think there's not a lot of music that's interesting, at least to hear, and not interesting to talk about. But there is a lot of music from the all time periods that is both interesting to talk about and interesting to hear. Like, we can definitely most pieces of Bach, you could spend semesters talking about just Beethoven Grosse Fuga and listening to it, and it would be great. You can, look at
Yeah,
a
and
lot
these
of like
composers,
Xenakis work.
they didn't think
Really
about
interesting
the
to talk
music for
about.
academic
Really
work.
interesting to hear.
Um, they just wrote music, and I think that that's
Yeah,
something about this
and I would say
conversation
like,
about perception, because
yeah,
most people are not really musically educated. It has to do with how the state is promoting the
yeah.
patrimony of
I mean, and
music,
there's a composer
what
like
is
I
read
think of
by
Xenakis.
people.
Like, if I think about Xenakis, his music is definitely academic and it's definitely very interesting to hear. But if I think of academic composers, would he be one that I would come up with right away? No.
In
But
fact, like
yeah,
Messiaen, his teacher told him not to be academic, not to follow that path, that he should follow his own path of his own training, special training in mathematics by being an architect and create music that way. And that's what he did. And that's why Xenakis is Xenakis, basically.
hmm
So you might say that some of the most unacademic people, like Messiaen, in fact, might come from the most academic places, like the Paris Conservatoire. So it's all about
I think it's
perception.
attitude and yeah, attitude and perception and like just really what your goal is in writing the piece. That
Because that a lot of the portion of the population is always gonna see our music as hyper academic because it has classical instruments. Just by that, and because it gets played in concert halls,
sometimes,
for example, and
sometimes, yeah,
yeah, sometimes whenever it gets played, you know what
Maybe. Yeah.
that a
maybe,
lot of people are only
but
gonna consider hip hop, for example, as
yeah,
non-academic music, or rock music that is rock stadium music as
you know,
non-academic music. So this is a very kind of slippery slope, you might say, because it's kind of like it depends on who you ask. Is it? And I don't like concluding or like reaching those conclusions in a conversation. Like, but in this case of what is academic, what isn't, I think that it really depends on who you ask, because you got so many different types of people that have this many different relationship to music that
Yeah.
has. And now that I've been teaching music for freshmen, like for people that have never been into a concert hall and have never have had any experience with music, and you see that it is even less and less every year, the experience with classical music, that people have never been to a symphony concert hall, to an orchestral hall. It's kind of like, it's really well for them. Everything that includes a violin, for example, or that includes a piano, a classical piano, most things that include that, or things that don't get played on the radio would be considered academic. So it's like really hard saying nowadays. So,
I mean,
and
and
we have
we're
a very
kind of
very
using that word.
special training and specific training. Yeah, but what?
Yeah, I mean, we're using the word kind of negatively, but I don't think it has to be like a negative thing, because
That
like also
definitely.
academic, like we all come from very academic backgrounds. We all have a lot of training that we use, and I
A
think
lot of people
part
will
of
call
academic
our
is
music very
well
academic.
thought out. We want music that can be maybe perceived in different ways and talked about, and that nature is academic. Maybe not all the time, but that nature is academic. We want we usually think quite a lot when we're writing our music, so that there's a lot of academic qualities. It's just that I guess music that is only written for the sake of the academia, or written for the sake of being able to talk about it in a certain manner, is maybe the problem. Is just that it can't just be all of one thing to be a really great piece, maybe.
Yeah, and well, all our backgrounds are academic. We shouldn't.
Oh
And
yeah, that's what I'm
I
saying,
think
and I don't think it's a bad thing. And I'm
I
like, I
think
was thinking about like some of Zanaka's pieces, and some of Zanaka's pieces, I studied in academia, and I mean,
I think that a lot
there's
of
a lot of
I wouldn't
mathematicalism in.
know. I wouldn't know half the music I know if it weren't for my academic training and for being.
Yeah, I studied in academic. It's very mathematical, which is it's very easy to it's very easy to come up with whole lectures about his music. Yet I feel like because the music isn't designed solely for the purpose of like lecturing about it or writing about it, it has like so much artistic depth and so much levels that like we don't necessarily deem it immediately as academic, because maybe we have some bitterness with the term or something, but it is academic. It's just not academic isn't necessarily a bad thing. Um,
Hmm. Uh, yeah, we've come back and forth about the
yeah.
term, but I think
Whereas
that
like Boulez, I think would be it'd be very easy if you were asked to lecture about a piece of Boulez. It wouldn't be a very difficult lecture to prepare. Um,
no, because he composed his music
yeah,
in a very
it would be a
strict,
pretty easy. Yeah,
rich
and there's so much
manner.
to talk about. But then if you were, so you could, it would be much easier to talk about Boulez's music for 3 hours than it would be to sit in a concert hall for 3 straight hours and listen to his music, in my opinion.
But also, we kind of compared non-academic music with theatrical music. And
Yeah.
theater, let's say, it survived because of academia. I don't see people kind of like lining up to see plays, for example. I don't see
Well,
them
yeah, not
lining up for
artistic ones.
concerts either. But it's like all of these arts that kind of like have survived. We can pretty much also define them by the arts that have survived because of universities right now. In a way, that could be another way to put it. If you go like, uh, we belong to a tradition, so we must recognize that our music is in certain ways academic, right? Because we are
Hmm.
children of academia, of a university. We all hold a PhD in music composition. We know of a lot of pieces that most of humanity, I will say, don't
I
know
mean, yeah,
about.
we had to take comprehensive exams and theory and musicology and addition,
Yes, we have a training that most people on earth don't have. So in the end, it's like we are more in, like most people will say that our music is more academic than not. And that's a problem that's come within this age during the 20th century, and we have inherited it. Mozart wasn't asking himself if his music was academic. But also, I will say that I didn't say this before, that computer music composers also face the same kind of problem, you might say, because their music, when you say electronic music, people, the masses, when I say people, I'm talking about the masses, audiences, big audiences. People will think about techno music or synthwave music, this beat driven dance music types of music. And when they listen to this computer music, to this electronic music, they think that, whoa, this is really weird, awkward. You cannot really dance to this, etc., etc. So I think that, yeah, if you've been trained in different types of music, it's very probable that if you don't follow another genre or style, you will fall into what is considered to be academic. But I guess what I want to express, what I want to say, what I want to articulate is that what we consider academic is probably not what most people would consider as academic. Whereas this happens in music, it wouldn't happen in something like, I would say, like in other fields. Like other fields are purely academic. Let's say most of the social sciences or literary theory or stuff like that. Like you assume it's gonna be pretty much academic all the way, and yeah, that's how it relates to literature and to writers. And some writers, if we compare ourselves to writers, writers are expected to have this knowledge of all past writers, right? And to be
Mhm.
academic in a way, and to know of the history of literature. But as a musician, it seems that you can get away without that knowledge, or without expressing that you come from that tradition. So it's kind of weird. Music's always kind of like, always weird to talk about music, or the state of music, because you have a whole industry that is a bit, if we talk about popular music, for example, that would certainly be on academic, not academic. Then most people that most artists, most uh, performers that are in the music world, as performers of popular music, are very ignorant of what has come in music before. Like, what are you gonna talk to them about, like Gregorian chant, for example? Will they even know what Gregorian chant is? Probably not, I will say. But does it
Mhm.
matter? I don't know. I'm not somebody that should judge that. We just learned a lot about music and cared enough about music to study it, to make it like the centerpiece of our lives in that way. But at the same time, um, you cannot discard other people, other performers that make a living this way just because they don't have the knowledge. But I just want to point out that con- that contrast, not contradiction, but that contrast. As a writer, for
Mhm.
example, you are expected to know most of the history of literature, to have read everything that is considered as
Yeah.
canon that has
As
come
a
before.
composer, I think we are too. I think performers maybe not so much, which yeah, I don't they're maybe not so much, but I do think, I mean, I do think we were. And I think other programs probably even more so than our programs, but I mean, we did have to take a um theory exam that, like, at least my theory exam was very broken classical theory. It wasn't.
Mhm.
Oh, I guess I did have some Webern on my theory exam too. So I guess it did span a little bit, but it wasn't super super. Webern's not that contemporary. Um, but I think from Bach to Webern kind of is what I had on my theory exam, and then we did have a musicology exam, but
For that, we had to study
I
pretty
can't
much.
remember anything early on my exam that I was asked. I think everything is. I think everything on my musicology exam was classical or romantic. I think everything.
I don't
I
remember
don't know.
it that well what came, but for studying
There
for
could
that
have been something early music, but I don't remember.
Norton anthologies and pretty much eat them up. I don't know how.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, but
it's,
we definitely were expected to know, quite a big range of music. I think as composers in our academic training anyway. I think it wasn't pushed as hard at University of Buffalo because I think um, David Fielder was much more interested about promoting individualism and like artistic integrity than technique and different styles, because he kind of recognized, there were composers there that it just wasn't useful them to know, technique. It wasn't useful for me to like perfect Bach counterpoint. If I could, write basic counterpoint for theory to teach theory and whatever, that was good enough. Um, yeah.
hmm. Shunting, what do you think about all of this? Any other thoughts?
Um, I
Not
would
necessarily.
say as an individual, I prefer not to find myself in a position that I must follow a certain kind of like rules or doctrine about how music should be made. But
Yeah.
but but no matter
Anyways.
how I think about music myself, I'm definitely heavily influenced by all the academic training and all the canon that I have studied or listened. I believe it is inevitable for an artist to grow because every serious artist must have already studied the masterpieces of their field. It is like
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Otherwise, how could we be inspired? But I I won't say after doing all these, then I'm academic or I'm like artistic. I believe that as a composer, I just want to write the music that I truly believe. That is, and I want to write the music that can represent me in terms of like sound or in terms of like personality. And I believe that's what David Felder wants us to do in according to his teaching or how he works with us or the guest artist or ensemble. Yeah. I have never heard of him to force us to compose or approach to music in a particular way or particular or a set of methods. Yeah. And I think this is a very healthy way to develop a department, or this is a very good way to nurture us musically or intellectually. So we think critically about ourselves, and at the same time, we can be very open-minded to other people's music, and that's very important too, because if we talk about like academic or academia, actually, in an academic setting, we learn to respect people of an opposing views. We respect some colleagues who writes gimmicky music, political music, or whatever music. We may have like a hard time to hear those pieces, but we think about we think seriously about what they work on, and we when we exchange, we usually respect each other. We seldom have any sort of like confrontation or argue something like that. I think that's very important. I yeah, I think that's very important because outside of schools, a lot of like opinionated people, they don't really discuss things critically, or they don't really learn how to respect other people's view. But I think the academic training that we have got has taught us to be more appreciative to how different views can be perceived. Yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So academia, in a way, kind of like in the way that it teaches you about music, according to you, it teaches you how to respect other types of music because you know the work involved of how much work, even if you don't like it, goes into writing a score. Would you say that?
Yeah, definitely.
That's fair.
Oh, I
That's a
mean,
point.
yeah,
I,
there's a lot of academic qualities. I mean, even to writing, yeah, a bad piece. I mean, there's still you're still thinking of something and writing it. I mean, yeah, writing it down. Yeah,
a lot of
yeah, I
hours,
think
weeks of your
yeah,
life go there. I would
I
say.
think notation plays a big part too because I think um I love notation. I think it's very interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
I am very much a type A, and I like that I can control my notation. I think my music is most of the time, admittedly, probably way over notated for what is necessary. I think it's yeah. 'Cause I just like that control aspect. I am also a visual artist, and I like the visual aspect. And my notations to many of my pieces have been very intricate and elaborate. And I think if I was going to be called a academic composer, it would be not for the music, but for the notations, because a lot of people love to look at the notations of people like Brian Ferneyhough and Lackaman, because they have some notations that are just very beautiful, and they're to look at. They're very elaborate, and I think in a very superficial way, I have tend to get looped in that camp because of that. Though I think my music and my intentions are quite different, but I do think maybe notation has a lot to do with it, because, well, I mean, if I go the opposite, so I spent 2 years of my PhD working on Liaison, the dancer piece that I've shown on this podcast before, with Melanie Acito. And so this piece, I had little stick figures drawn out in notes, mostly just so I would remember things, because, yeah, it was not really a score, and we had everything videotaped, like, we probably had just dozens and dozens of hours of video. I mean, we had probably more than that. We had everything videotaped, and we're constantly taking what we had done and redoing it, re-editing it, and then retaping it. So, like, the documentation kind of served as the score for the most part. And when I premiered the piece, there was no score at the time of the premiere. And it worked fine. There was no necessary for the score. But in the academia, we had a portfolio, and for me to count writing this piece as doing work, and doing work that was academic and went towards my academic degree, I had to actually have something physical to put in the folder. So I created a score for the piece that the dancer had no relation. I showed her, she wasn't even that interested. No relation to. I think the technical drawings are useful, but the score itself, I think, is not very useful. And it's often one of the first things in the academia that people want to see about that piece is the score. And was such an afterthought. And it was literally only created for the academia, to be able to count as an academic project. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of weight, I think, in the score.
I think that
Yeah.
you've pointed out one of the downsides of academia, and that's that it's turned music somehow in some venues, in some, let's say, context, to be something of more of a thing to study rather than a thing to experience. And
Mm-hmm.
we've forgotten, like, the academia sometimes forget that music is mainly something, a phenomenon to be experienced, to be dealt with, to engage with, not something that, yeah, we go back to the score, to the paper.
Yeah.
The score that is not played is nothing. It doesn't mean anything.
If you're presenting your work, you're expected to bring the score of your music. I finally got to the point, I think, in grad school, because I think oftentimes when I did that, my music was just misinterpreted as, like, new complexity, which is just really not. That I would just not. I usually would bring a score because I kind of felt like I had to, because I was in academia, but I usually wouldn't go out of my way to pass them out unless somebody, like, really asked for them. I kind of, and if I did, I usually would try to pass it out after hearing a piece. Yeah. But yeah, the score, it's I would say that I had to kind of work to have the confidence to do that because the score was expected.
Yep, it's expected, and that's I've mentioned Mozart on this podcast on this episode before, and yeah, that's pretty much how he made music. He had it in his head, he played it, and afterwards is that the score came as an afterthought many times because he got it. He in that sense, the music was an experience. The music was the score is only documenting what trying to document that experience and trying so that it may be replicated in the past. And now we can also speak about Stockhausen and the state of affairs right now and how he foresaw that the art form, the art itself, the artwork could only be a recording, for example. And in your case, it may very well be a video recording of the piece. This is how it is performed. This is these are the techniques, and this is a performance. And who says that that isn't like as legitimate as a written out score, right? It
Hmm.
has to do with technology, with the medium, with how we interpret that medium should be propagated, you might say, in many ways.
Well,
So
and I think it's outdated in some. I don't think
yeah, that's what I
in
say.
some
What I
ways
say that you're
academia yeah, it promotes complexity, but not necessarily progressivity, especially in the context of how we present our music, um, what formats it in, concert culture. Those things are really tough to crack.
I think that a lot of people kind of misunderstand what you're trying to say because it is not in a conventional style of notation, right? But if you show them a video of what you're trying to do, they may grasp it much better, I think. Because of the physicality involved, right? It's like here you should do this, and how people are learning nowadays that visual aspect. That I think that also comes into play in a way, and academia has kind of like, well, yeah, academia kind of characterizes itself because it wants to hold on to the past. Is what it because of its inertia, its resistance to new ideas, and that should also be pointed out. When I speak with theorists like social scientists or psychologists or literary theorists or theorists of culture, they are still referencing these French people, post-structuralists from the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and it's something that has stayed. And it's like we haven't been able to move on, like within the realms of academia, or they haven't been able, or whatever. The disciplines are held back because of those sacred cows in a way. And that's also something that must be considered when we are talking about all of this. And this what we do is art in the end, and art shouldn't be bound by it should be well definitely is influence so that we don't believe that we have discovered a new continent and it has all been written out before it has been done before. But art shouldn't be bound but by conventions. Art should be free. Art should be about the exploration, about the journey, what about that expression that you cannot find elsewhere. Um, and I think that that's why the academia, why telling that something is academic, kind of like has a negative connotation, has a morality involved in it. It's like it's kind of stuck in a way. It's stuck in the world of theory, in the world of ideas. It kind of like doesn't try to go into the practical world, into the real world. At least that's been like how it's been perceived and how it has even presented itself in many ways. Um, we have talked here about like being in the safe realm of academia, right? If you have a tenure job and you have uh, a good position where you can compose, then you don't have to worry about many things about going down into like what is the world thinking. You are really like apart from everything, from everyone, not in the moment, kind of stuck, you might say. uh, that's another aspect, although you can argue that being stuck or being isolated is positive towards an art form too. So there are the different aspects that can still be talked about, I think. That's what I will have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything to add? Chunting or Megan?
No, I think.
No, I think that it's been a really good talk. Shunting, are you over there? Did you go away? Hello? I think that we lost Shunting. But yeah, that I think that that's what I have to say. It's kind of like a back and forth. Because okay, you kind of in an academic setting, you kind of get away from the people, from the masses, but at the same time you cannot be led by what the masses want. You also have to not impose, but kind of like search your own way, your own individuality as an artist. That's how you uh put something new on the table. That's how you leave a mark, your mark on the world, not by following, but not by following the masses, not by following what's been done, but being conscious of it. Um, on the other hand, if you get too academic, you get too far into that isolation, into being disconnected from reality, living in your own world that kind of like have no relation to what's going on the real world. Uh, that's where you get pieces that are hated by performers, for example, because you kind of like want something to work on an instrument and it just works in your head and not on the instrument. Just to say an example, for example, yeah, just to say something. So it's kind of like a fine line there between what academia brings against what you can get out of academia and where the real artistic merit resides there. Yeah, just
Yeah.
thinking about it. It's what I wanted to say. So do you want to add anything else? Or
No, I mean, I think, yeah, I think it has it. I mean, it's probably a word that has a lot of stigma that is sometimes unfair. And I don't think, I think it can be a bad thing, but it's not. There's a lot of good qualities about academia too, and it's just I guess, a complicated thing, and I think ultimately we just you kind of have to try to your best to navigate. At least what I try to navigate my best to navigate, pressures that I may feel that my music has to be a certain way to be considered serious, or to be performed by a particular group or at a particular festival. And and some of those may be true. Like it might be true. My music is probably never going to win like a Rome Prize, because, not because it's not academic enough, but because, it's kind of what we go last episode. It's so similar. It's just that I try to write for content. Like, I want my music to be my own music, and I want my music to be something that I would really enjoy experiencing. And if I'm going to enjoy experiencing it, I don't think people are that unique. There's going to be other people that, at least a couple others, that might enjoy it too. Yeah, and I think
that's
where I
human.
come. And if it's difficult to talk about, then it's difficult to talk about. And
I
it
think
doesn't mean I wouldn't.
difficult to talk about is a good thing, because
Yeah.
you don't have a scheme, you don't have a blueprint on how to speak about it. Like, the thing about Boulez that you were talking about is that he laid out all the theoretical groundwork beforehand,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you could use that very same theoretical groundwork to explain his music. The same with Warinen, the same with Babbitt. That's, I think, why we talk about them about as being um, academic composers. Is
Yeah.
that they kind of knew where they were going, whereas many other artists just they throw themselves into the work without knowing where they are going, and the work, like, the the art form itself takes them in different directions until they reach the artwork, the completed artwork, you might say.
Yeah.
And I think
I mean,
that's what you did with Asido, pretty much, in
yeah.
your piece. Like, as you
Yeah, I think that's also, like, I mean, this episode just kind of goes in contrast with our last one, in that, we were kind of picking apart music that was very, very conservative and didn't have a lot of depth to it.
Mhm.
It was basically bad, worse copycats of other, works. And, obviously that a lot of prestigious prizes were, looking for that. And so, I'm sure winning some of those prizes was one of the goals of those pieces, while for the composer, I would imagine. So that's one extreme, but there's also kind of going to an extreme of, making things too, I mean, you can go anyway, like too novel, too academic, that, like, if the goal isn't for the actual experience of the work, it probably will come out a little bit short.
Yeah, that kind of sucks. It's like, the goal of, well, here I may be a bit dogmatic, or idealistic in the way that I see music, but the goal of music is to be experienced, to have a communal experience, right? Uh,
Mhm.
so it's kind of like it's self-defeating to try and write a piece so that it wins this or that prize, etc., etc. So
Yeah.
kind of counterintuitive from my way of looking at things, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
But
kind of
yeah,
like,
I think it's a good anything.
yeah. Well, I think we've talked enough about academia for the day. Good, good,
Yeah.
Good talk, good discussion over here. I don't think I have any new ideas. None of my ideas are new, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Anything to add
Hopefully
here?
the episodes will come up a little bit more regularly than they have. It's been a busy couple of months for the three of us, but
Yeah, yeah. I think that we haven't thought about what is academia in a while, so this was
yeah,
pretty therapeutic, you might say, in a way, or at least self-reflecting. Those self-reflections that you have to do from time to time. But whatever, it's good. It's good.
yeah,
So I think that we can leave it here and
yeah,
just say goodbye to everyone that might be watching
yeah.
to the camera or anything. So be safe. Bye.
Bye.